Awesome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Illusion Horror and Con. This is panel 8.5, Sci-Fi and Horror. I am here as your moderator. My name is Bear Winters. I am the creative director for a company called Tapham Systems. I made a game called Project Biomodus, working on a new game called Shores of Sheol. And I have the very unique pleasure of talking to these wonderful folks about sci-fi and horror. We're on the last day of the con. I hope everybody's had a fantastic time. I'm sure many of the people here on the panel have spoken in other previous panels or have been enjoying it themselves. So I am going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves. So I'm just going to go from left to right on my screen here. Michael, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first? Michael appears to be muted.
Am I muted now?
No, you're good.
You're good. Strange. I have a small button here. I must have forgotten to push it back again. Oh, no, sorry. Hello, my name is Michael Petersén. I am a game designer and author working in Sweden in Swedish, this very strange, utterly unreasonable language that we talk here in Sweden. I started out writing professionally for role-playing games in 1983. I have published several games. Among them are the original edition of Cult, the role-playing game, published in 1991 in Sweden, and then spread out over the world in various editions. These days, I write together with my partner, Gunilla Jonsson. I write for, guess what? Cult Divinity Lost, a great campaign and oversight of Berlin in Germany. And I am also working for Call of Cthulhu Sweden, the localization of Call of Cthulhu here in Sweden. And I'm also writing together with Gunilla a series of novels set in the Cult universe. That's about it.
Nice. Well, great to meet you. Thank you for coming to the panel. Matthew, how about you?
Hello, I'm Matt Sanderson. I'm a freelancer who's worked in RPGs for about 10 plus years now, usually with games that have the word Cthulhu in the title, but also with Cult Divinity Lost and Vampire the Masquerade. So yeah, I tend towards the horror end of the spectrum. I'm also co-host of the podcast The Good Friends of Jackson Elias, where we talk about, well, enough such things like horror gaming. So yeah, this is very, very much up my street.
Awesome. Great to meet you, Matt. John, let's go with you next.
Hi, I'm John Hook. I have been a freelance writer also for about close to 15 years. And I'm also a podcaster. So yeah, I've been working with Call of Cthulhu and some fantasy RPG stuff. And my current podcast is Modern Mythos, with my co-host Seth Skorkowski, and we talk about Call of Cthulhu and horror role-playing games.
Very cool. And then last but certainly not least, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Paul Baldowski. I've freelanced in game writing for 20 years. I've worked on Paranoia, Rivers of London, Symbaroum, Liminal, Night Black's Agents, Trophy, Maelstrom, The Terminator. And that aside, I also do some self-publishing as well, and have published Cthulhu Hack, The Desanction, and Sanction, all of which, one way or another, are tinged with horror because it just happens.
Because why not?
Yeah.
Well, again, great to have you all here. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all. So I do have, we did talk about having some questions ahead of time. Just for arrangement, but I do have one that I'm going to hit you all with in order. So for the first one, I'm going to call you out by name. I want to hear some answers for this one. But what movie, book, or game would you consider to be the gold standard in sci-fi horror? And I'm going to go reverse order here. So Paul, give us your gold standard.
I'll just opt for the easy one of Alien, I guess. But
It's a good one.
There you go. Right, everyone else is just screwed. No, so I think, yeah, considering when it was made, and the nature of it, it's got the ramping tension, the whole exploration, investigation, tons of unknowns. It's just pure, sort of excellence in terms of, if you want to get into the mood for running some sci-fi horror, that would be one of the places to definitely go.
Excellent. John, how about you?
That's an excellent answer. But I think I will pivot and say John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oof.
That's always been a fan favorite for me.
Mhm.
Great horror and amazing sci-fi in it. It's a staple.
We talked a lot about it in the body horror panel. The Thing is definitely the gold standard for body horror, I think, in my view, anyway. Matthew, yours.
Oh, I'm glad my choice hasn't come up yet, because I was thinking I'm going to have to avoid the obvious ones, maybe like Alien or Event Horizon. But no, my favourite goes back quite a way, back into the 60s. Quatermass and the Pit, the Hammer horror adaptation of the BBC TV series, because I think it starts off with a more archaeological bent, but it weaves its way through a blending of supernatural horror and sci-fi to come to quite a localized apocalyptic conclusion. It's what it does in terms of narrative investigation, that gradual uncovering of the mystery and the horror that underlies everything. I think you can't beat it in any other. Something weird happened on my screen. You can't beat it in terms of other sci-fi horror out there for me. So no, that's the gold standard from my end.
Perfect. It's not a movie I've seen, but I want to see it.
You have to. It's great.
I'm gonna now. You'll have to send me the name again so I can grab that. And then finally, Michael. You are muted again, Michael. Still muted.
I'm back now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something that very weird here. I lost my connection to internet for a short moment,
Oh.
but I seems to be back now. Oh dear, all the good answers seems to be gone.
It doesn't have to be a movie, remember. It can be a book, can be a game, could be.
Oh dear. In that case, I'll cheat and I'll take Alien the role-playing game.
That's
which
fair.
is the closest I could go to my original true answer, which would be Alien the movie, the first one. So yeah, basically Alien, the first movie, is my absolute favorite. It's the only movie that's ever scared almost the shit out of me. I'm still trembling at the thought of re-seeing it. I still get fearful around xenomorphs. So yeah, that one would be my true answer.
Yep. No, these are all great answers. Absolutely fantastic answers. So going into the kind of more like a free form type of thing, like I'm not gonna like specifically point people out in answers, so feel free to answer as in how you wish. I did have this question here, and it's mostly to get your opinion. And the question is horror in sci-fi harder to portray just due to the nature of technology and how technology helps people? So to give you an example, so like in Alien, it's even though it's a very sort of high-tech environment, the crew don't really have weapons, they just have flamers. It's a civilian crew versus a single xenomorph. Whereas in Aliens, there's a lot of there's pulse rifles, there's APCs, that kind of thing. Is it harder to do good horror in sci-fi just because of the nature of technology and how technology helps humanity do greater things? And
I would initially say I don't think Alien and Aliens are particularly sci-fi in that respect. Purely because they're not too distant from what we have. I mean, they've got drives to push them to distant worlds, but everything else is pretty much same. You could transfer it to the modern day, and you wouldn't massively change anything. Which obviously they do in various prequels and whatever. But I think, as with even modern day horror, technology can be an obstacle if you allow it to be an obstacle. But that probably means that you need to think about the horror you're trying to portray in a different way. There's often the issues that people will bring to the table, not the gaming table, maybe the GMing table of, hello, Mr. Writer, you've put this in your adventure, and this, references to things like mobile phones and the internet. Just because we've gone a few hundred years in the future and we've got, even wider ranging communication forms and computers, I don't think that in and of itself represents a challenge to presenting situations which are horrific, because it's not really the horror comes down to what we can't account for, what we don't, the things that are incomprehensible. It's the sort of reason to pick one writer completely at random. You could take a Lovecraft story, and take the principles into the far future, because it was incomprehensible in the 1920s, and the mythos is still incomprehensible in the year 1 billion. Yeah, because ultimately they've been around for so long that they are always going to be incomprehensible. So if you lean into that kind of horror, sci-fi, is not a challenge regardless of the technology. It's never going to help.
But there are some problems with the players at the playing game. We've been playing quite a lot at conventions, and we suddenly realized, to our horror, that quite a lot of modern players, young modern players, don't get the concept of that there are no mobile phones. Which means they're sitting at the table, they're getting hunted by this creature often from Call of Cthulhu, some strange monster they don't really comprehend, that they lose their mind if they actually see, and they don't really get it. Why can't I just phone the cops? Why can't the cops do anything about this? I mean, of course, technology is a problem. If technology gets advanced enough, for example, the xenomorph getting loose on the Enterprise would be a very, very short story.
Yeah.
It would take about 10 minutes for the computer system to identify the unknown life form moving about in the tunnels. They would just send a team with disruptors and disintegrators and put them in disintegrators and say goodbye.
Or even quicker, they just use a transporter to teleport it into space.
Yeah, but they want to kill it, perhaps. It would be quite easily done.
You make the crystalline structure of the alien resistant to transporters or something. Its DNA is fundamental. It's back to
cheating.
It's incomprehensible. Incomprehensible biology is exactly what you need when you need it.
What is it they always say? They always say this in Star Trek when something can't be teleported. It's like they're in a state of temporal flux. I think I've heard the term temporal flux be used to explain why they can't do stuff in like almost every bloody episode. Yeah, and like, anybody else have any thoughts on technology and horror? I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, the main thing that came to mind for me when you used that example of the difference between Alien and Aliens, well, you had a whole load of Marines in the second one that got a whole load more rifles and weaponry than the first lot, and look what handed to them. They got their asses handed to them real quick. So didn't make a big difference in that front. But if you've got players or GMs that are worried about the impact of technology, let me introduce you to a guy called David Cronenberg, because that guy can make technology horrific in all cases. Go watch Existenz, go watch Videodrome, make the tech the horror. If you're worried about what it can do to help, in inverted commas, the players, make it something that will really terrify them.
Perfect.
One problem with technology would be, in my case, that isolation is, for me, a rather important part of horror. And isolation is harder to do if you're on a really high-tech level. So, of course, it's workable, but you have to think at least a couple of rounds extra. You have to think a bit extra. How do I solve this? I mean, if I want to keep the xenomorph on the Enterprise, of course, I would make sure it wouldn't be possible to even see it You couldn't spot it with the sensors because it's so goddamn strange. But you at least, to have us as a game master or as a writer or constructor, you have to think about these things. So technology is something you have to take into account when you create your adventures in horror science fiction. At least in my opinion.
To kind of blend off this topic then as a sub question, do you think, as as we get older as writers, and most of us, I'm assuming, experienced a time when we didn't have a cell phone, as we start writing and designing for a crowd that has known technology and mobile connectivity over their entire lives, is that going to be like a whole new form of horror to take that away? Like, is the removal of those technological quality of life items going to be a kind of horror that we've not had the opportunity to, that we would have a hard time experiencing just because we're older?
I don't know. I think as we use technology and have technology available in sci-fi gaming, I think it's interesting to have the technology, because everyone has certain assumptions that technology will allow you to do certain things, and I think the challenge and the fun in it is let the players go down those use their assumptions and then illustrate how those assumptions don't have the outcome that they expect, so that their assumptions are going to be incorrect, right? So technology can reduce isolation, but if this is a sci-fi, what if you figure out as you might be physically remote, but you think, I'm just going to reach out and communicate with people, and you suddenly realize, or what you didn't realize until you started using your technology, is that there's a time dilation, right? Now you're communicating to people in the past, and they're receiving your messages from the future, or you're communicating into the future and you're in their past, right? So you're still isolated and you're still calling for help, but there's nothing that they can do, right? You could be using scanning equipment, right? And then suddenly the equipment is giving you false information. So I think having players who are accustomed to having real life technology, and then they want to have and try and utilize technology in their games, I think changing the way their expectations are of that technology, and then forcing them to think outside the box, is what elevates a character's actions from mundane into heroic, right? From going, into solving the mystery and, either just saving themselves or saving others, and, solving the problem. And this is also the tool on why player characters can't rely on outside help, right? You can't just use your cell phone and call the police, because all of the authorities and anybody that you call, you should use them as illustrations on, they are doing the expected thing. They take the obvious path to problem solving, and if it's going to be an entertaining game, it shouldn't have an obvious answer. It shouldn't have an obvious solution. But let the cops come in, call the cops, get to a safe distance, observe what the cops do, and then when they get slaughtered, and you go, well, they were doing exactly what I was going to do. Now you realize that's not the right answer, right? I have to think outside the box and come up with a different solution to this problem. And technology can sometimes help with that solution. Maybe you find a different way to use your communicator or your scanners, or you end up having to abandon them, and go primitive. But I think players who are, and this is a roundabout way to get to it, but I think players who are used to real life technologies can learn lessons in game of, don't always rely on your tools. right? You sometimes have to rely on your meat tools and figure this out for yourself and maybe go primitive. But I think that's a fun way to do things like that in a sci-fi setting.
I think the unreliability of technology has been used quite a lot in horror genres, or at least for tension. Like Space 2001, HAL is like the AI that's eventually, the problem. And it's actually kind of refreshing sometimes when the technology is reliable. Like I found this with Interstellar recently. Like Case and Tars in Interstellar are probably my two favorite characters in that movie, just because they circumvent the usual trope of the AI is the thing that screws up and causes everybody to, like Alien, for instance, has that same problem. The synthetic is faulty, and to have that. But I think that's a commonly used trope, is where the technology fails. But in horror, are you saying then that the technology should work, but the result should be the circumvented, or should you say that the technology itself should be unreliable to maintain kind of using technology to in that horror setting? I'm not sure I'm phrasing that very well.
I think the problem, whether it's a creature or something, the problem needs to be more complex, that the technology, when used as expected, won't render the results that you were hoping for.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. Anybody else?
Way with reference to, like, to take the AI as an example, rather than having the situation where the AI is evil, you wind it in the other direction, where in fact the AI is fundamentally invested in the continued existence of the group, in whatever shape or form, but it doesn't suffer from the weakness of humanity in having connections, compassion, and so forth, and puts forward a valid argument around why something should be done that puts some of the team in harm's way. I hope I'm not giving anything away, and it's not necessarily the finest example, but Alien Romulus, kind of the AI in that is at times calculatingly logical in making a decision, and the decision makes sense, but obviously the humans who are involved with the AI allow their hearts and connections to override them, and it's that the AI is not evil. The AI is simply not allowing any weighting of its calculations to be tied to something it doesn't have, emotional connection to people. And then so you avoid that notion. At the same time, you mentioning how the fact that ChatGPT is already pleading not to be turned off. We're almost there already. So, but yeah.
I love HAL 9000's story arc, because it completes in the movie. Because I haven't read the books. I haven't read Clark's books, but in the movies 2001 and 2010, HAL has a complete story arc, which I love. In 2001, he comes across as the villain, but we find out that he was really childlike and didn't understand what was going on. And once he was brought back online and people spoke truth to him, and then David Bowman comes back and speaks truth to him, he's all in. He's all in. He finally understands, and he's willing to do self-sacrifice to further humanity's goals. And I thought that was a great arc for HAL 9000. I think it's a great computer. I want to have not HAL 9000.
The hat off to the actor that played the synthetic in Romulus as well. Going from the two stages. I again don't want to spoil it because it's fairly recent. there are kind of two stages of being for that one actor in their role as the synthetic, and I think he played them both exceptionally well. So yeah, any more thoughts from anybody on the idea of technology? Okay, so let's kind of go into a bit of a subsect then of this. So from a personal nature, I love the idea of posthumanism and transhumanism in games. And in my media, project, not to toot my own horn, Project Biomotus that I wrote is also very sort of transhuman in nature. Is there a way that how would you folks do horror in a setting where for instance, like Eclipse Phase or some other game where you're not exactly playing a human? Like, what is a good horror scene to use for people that may live for a much longer time, that may be more resistant to, physical trauma, have incredible healing, or some other kind of like technological abilities? How would you introduce horror into those scenarios?
We played quite a long campaign with Eclipse Phase first edition, actually. And the horror is always there in Eclipse Phase. I mean, you have these titans who have, for some reason, stopped exterminating us. They could start any time again. They're still around. There's at least 2 titans in the solar system. Big spoiler if you haven't played it, but there is. And we also have these strange corruption coming out from somewhere else, which is part of the horror setting. And Orgy used quite a lot of being immersed in virtual reality and not realizing it. We spent at least 5 or 6 sessions with us totally unaware of that we were being in a virtual reality set up by one of the titans. That could bring quite a lot of horror into a game when suddenly things stopped working as they should. For example, we could suddenly realize, okay, we're back on Earth somehow, and somehow our regeneration abilities are not functioning as they should. There's a lot of radioactivity where we are. We are actually getting sick. You could bring horror in a virtual reality, and you can use the setting itself to have a great horror, because there's always the fear of the titans. There's always the fear of this strange corruption seeping in. So Eclipse Phase works quite well, I think.
Well, I think that's the thematic to Eclipse Phase, right? So that's part of the background there, which is great. Eclipse Phase is an absolutely fantastic game. When it comes to introducing horror tropes into games that might, so if you have like a sci-fi game and you want to introduce a horror trope to, like Star Wars, for instance, right? The Star Wars game, you've got different types of aliens, you've got different types of creatures. Some may be playing droids. If you're going to introduce horror into that kind of situation, how would you do that? What would you focus on as your kind of horror trope there? Would it still be kind of like an illusionary? This is again more of a question to Michael in this case, just because of your answer. Would you say then it has to be illusionary, or would it have to be a corruptive thing? Is it what would that be your go-to for introducing horror?
No, not in Star Trek. I mean, that was a specific item for Eclipse Phase. In Star Trek, I am actually considering using Lovecraftian outer gods, which is a great thing to have happening to a starship crew.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And as far as I know, I played a long, long time ago, I played a scenario, I think it was made by Marcus Rowland, which was actually a traveler with a Lovecraftian monster loose on a small moon.
Mm.
I can't remember the name. I think it was published in White Dwarf a long, long time ago. But that has also worked out very, very well with this bunch of not murder hobos, because we were much too nice for that, but even a bunch of murder hobos on a spaceship landing on that moon and finding out what the hell is hunting us now in the dark. what the hell is this thing that can melt through ship metal? And how the fuck do we kill something that has no real physical form? So that worked quite well. So I think to put something in perspective, perhaps doing things very, very much strange for the situation, making the horror being very, very much far out would work fine for me. And equally think, have a horror setting on the Enterprise where I have a serial killer loose. That would also work goddamn nice. One of the high officers on this spaceship in the Starfleet is a serial killer. Every year he chooses one of the ensigns and murders them in a gruesome way. And this has been going on for some 10, 20 years. That's also an excellent horror story.
No, I agree.
Man, that would be cool. Dexter on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Wasn't there was a guy on Voyager who was kind of like that. There was I can't remember the character's name, but he always plays weird dudes.
Brad Dourif.
Yeah,
that's the one. Yeah. I think he plays a serial killer in Voyager. I thought that was actually pretty well done.
I think he was a reformed serial killer, if there's such a thing. He has tried to stop killing people, and
that's right, because he got caught and then they locked him up, and he kind of became a reoccurring character throughout the series, I think. Yeah. Anybody else like examples of horror in a transhuman or post-human society?
A game that I haven't really dove into as much as I'd like to, mainly because I'm a chronically slow reader and it's a game that's only relatively come out pretty recently, is The Electric State, which from the bits I've read of that very much appealed to me, that you have this idyllic, almost Matrix-like artificial reality that people plug themselves into, while there is this slow creeping apocalypse that's enveloping the real world after a civil war that's gone to all out proportions. But there are elements of this idyllic, computer controlled, blissful, illusionary world bleeding through into the real world. You've got machines that have been built by machine consciousnesses out there in the wilderness. You've also got these cargo cults that have developed around technology and are worshipping it in certain fashions. Because I don't know about everyone else, but I know I drive a car every day. I couldn't tell you how the thing works. I'm pretty sure there's people out there that have a computer and don't know how that works. So there's going to be people out there with various different levels of intellectual context to put these things into. People that understand what they are going to do what humans do and latch on to, this mythical box does something magical, bow down and worship it. And from that, you can then easily drip feed horror into a scenario.
Nice. Talking about machines making machines, is anybody familiar with the manga Blame by Nihei? I absolutely suggest it if you haven't. It's a weirdly geographic manga with a lot of sort of transhumanism vibes in it, but it's very, very good. Biomega is another one that he did as well. Paul, John, any thoughts?
I mean, I would think in a cyberpunk game, a sci-fi rust monster would be the scariest thing, right? Just to come and take away all your plugins and stuff. But transhumanism is a little odd for me because players are human. Players don't really have I mean, I would say I would challenge any player to come up with a motivation and a concept for the character that is inhuman. You know, whatever characters you're playing, even if your character is in a sci-fi game isn't human at all, you're playing a Wookiee or something, you're still, motivated by money, and have friendships and you still eat and you want a job. I mean, everything that your character does is a human trait. And so I don't think horror is any different. I don't think it matters what kind of character you're playing. I think the horror elements can still be the same. It just you can tailor it differently. Now, if you're playing an alien creature, and maybe the game system, or just right at that table itself, the player and the game master really gonna do a deep dive into that alien's planet and background and things like that, and maybe there's a boogeyman for that race that is immaterial for any other race. That would be interesting to kind of have just that one character. It's almost like an It Follows kind of thing, right? Only that race can see it. It's only being pursued by that, and he's the only victim, and it doesn't matter with any other. That could be an interesting setup, But for the most part, because we're all human, it doesn't matter that what the characters were playing. I think the horror is almost always going to be universal. I could also be a cynic, so there's that.
No. That's a valid viewpoint. In fact, the idea of It Follows is terrifying to me. I hate that whole concept. Just wigs me out the entire time.
But it was a great idea about on specific alien species being hunted by their own boogeyman. I think I'll steal that one.
That's pretty good. I like that. Paul, have you got anything for us?
I was scrabbling around in my head for some post-humanist sort of singularity type stuff. The one that came to mind, which honestly isn't a horror, but I imagine if I ran it, it would end up that way. Free Market is a post sort of singularity, post-want game where the player characters are inhabitants of a space station called the Donut, and kind of you need to, when you want for nothing and you can't die, how do you spend your time? And it probably pushes and challenges the players, and probably the whole storytelling structure, to be able to work out how can you fill your time, what can you do, how can you earn your space, you're on this place, when everyone can get whatever they want when they want it, sort of thing. I just envisage that this is an opportunity for horror and horrible things, and it's or at least it's going to edge into the more incomprehensible side of things, where because you ultimately, how can you grasp this concept, even at a most basic level as people? How do we grasp the concept of a post-death rebirth? I imagine it would in and of itself be a bit of a freak out situation to even start with, but if life gets to the point where there's almost no thought in death, then where the horror can go in all sorts of directions. But yeah, as I said, probably not written for that basis, but Free Market is another
We actually played a game set in something very close to Ian Banks' universe, but we borrowed in Neil Ashe's Jane technology, if you read his books, which is basic something from probably even an earlier universe that corrupts and devours everything in its way, trying to recreate the Jane society, which is very, very aggressive and not very nice to have around. And that worked quite well. Even though we were immortal, we could still be corrupted. I mean, you were saved as you could be reborn into a new body from your memories being in a stack in your neck. But you could always be corrupted. The memory could be corrupted. Somebody could steal the stack. Somebody could change your memories. Somebody could change who you thought you were. And all this technology, this Jane technology, was always a threat, even though you had a gigantic spaceship with its own mind. So it is workable with transhuman horror, I think. It takes a bit more work, though.
So it's the horror of identity then at that point, I think. Where if something is corrupting your identity.
Yeah.
The other part is unrestrained hedonism. If you like I think the most relevant I can think of is the 40K universe, where elves essentially were so long lived and so bored with their lives of being in blissful, peace, is that they essentially fucked a demon into existence, which started eating their souls. Because they grew into deeper levels of hedonism and feeling more sensation, and that started moving into pain and torture and that kind of thing. And longevity is possibly that's another aspect of longevity that you don't really think of, but is covered pretty well, like Hellraiser, for instance, as well, with the sensation of the flesh and then the weird hedonism that goes with that as well. So I think we've talked about this somewhat, but I want to kind of like specifically drill down to everybody's thoughts on what aspects of sci-fi you personally lean into when you're making or running horror games. Like, what is your go-to when what part of horror do you like tackling the most? What are you most comfortable with when you're running or writing a sci-fi game?
I'm a low-hanging fruit kind of guy, so I do body horror. I go super simple. I just love body horror. I love describing it at the table. I love seeing players squirm, and they're just going, "All right, stop." And then I'm like, "Oh, okay. What was that?" It's your turn now. And just. But yeah, I love body horror. I think it's a lot of fun.
What is it about body horror that appeals to you? What is it? What is the part that
having your body injured, having it morphed and twisted is something that everybody is afraid of, right? Nobody wants that to happen to themselves, and then to have it described. And I try to be as cinematographic as I can when I'm describing these things. They're just it's fun. I think I have that's where I'm really enjoying myself, is trying to bring that horror and creep factor to the table. And bringing that in. I wonder why my camera went out like that.
I think you're. I was going to say, I think your camera dropped there.
Weird. I don't know. I didn't touch
He's back.
a thing. I promise. I didn't touch a thing. Yeah. So it's body horror. One of my favorite films. I didn't mention this earlier, but is David Cronenberg's The Fly. It's such a good movie, right? I love, and it's sci-fi. Technology went wrong, right? You expected it to do one thing, and it did a different thing because an X factor was included that couldn't be accounted for, and yeah, I just love body horror. I think it's a lot of fun, but it's so easy, So I'm just simple. I go for the easy stuff.
So Tom just put in a question in chat. Just popped up. So how do you do body horror and sci-fi?
Well, I love the Alien role-playing game, and
that is definite body horror and sci-fi.
There's a ton of great sci-fi body horror in that, and just being able to describe the way certain things look, what the texture might look like. In the Alien role-playing game, there's a great intro 3-part cinematic scenario called Chariot of the Gods, and I just love that scenario. And so as you find this derelict ship, and you board it and you start going through it, and it's so cold on the inside. I always describe it how it's all crystalline and everything, and the ice is everywhere. And as you're traversing down this hallway, and again, with the Alien universe, it is the 1980s as it was imagining the future would be, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't our millennia imagining the future, it was the 80s, right? So that's why the technology is kind of rustic and clunky and stuff, because we were rustic and clunky in the 80s. And so you have these hallways that've got the really strong girder beams, ribs in the hallways every 10 feet or so. And as you're coming down this one hallway, there's an encounter area where your beams of light can see that there's a pair of frozen legs kind of sticking out into the hallway, but the body is hidden behind one of those ribs, those girders in the hallway. So you don't get a good look of the body until you are right there on it, because it's tucked in behind that rib. So as you come up and then you get to look at it, it is a bursted body. The upper torso is just basically gone. Something has come out of him. There's a shotgun and stuff there, but that's a great scene to describe your first view of what a corpse looks like after it's birthed something, a parasite of some sort. And this entire corpse is just like, frozen meat in your freezer. It's just stuck and anchored to the floor there, and everything's, glistening with crystals and stuff. And it's a great, initial, loss of stress and everything or the gaining of stress for those characters in that game. And it's really cool. But yeah, I love to sprinkle in descriptors, because body horror is perfect for, doing cinematic descriptors and just paint these pictures in the players' heads.
And that game also has an excellent system for horror, which you were talking slightly about, the stress dice. You get stress dice when you see something horrible or something that breaks your sense of reality. And they're very nice when you have 1 or 2 or 3 stress dices. But you're starting having 8 or 10 stress dices, and something horrible is going to happen if you get a 1 on those dices. It gets very, very horrifying. And I do agree. It's a great game, and it's an excellent adventure. And they make quite a lot of them from the Free League. So I have to agree quite a lot. Body horror is nice. I could perhaps prefer having the serial killer about Enterprise as well.
I like that.
Yeah. So the unexpected is always a good way to put horror in sci-fi, I think. That would be my way. I can't explain every detail of it, but if I see a specific setting, I can always think, what can I do with this? How can I do something unexpected with this? So horror is a bit for me in sci-fi is the unexpected things happening.
Can you give an example, like something that you would, if you were running a campaign, what would be an example of something unexpected happening that you would use to terrify your players?
For example, if I were playing Traveller, we are playing Traveller at the moment, the Moon Goes Second Edition. If I were running the game and we were struck on some asteroid looking for signs of earlier civilizations or the ancients being around, what about something truly supernatural? What about this? There's actually a ghost in this asteroid. That would probably be something very, very much unexpected, and done right, it could probably scare the shit out of the players as well. I mean, they could go around gunning at everything they see creeping in the shadows, but there would be no help for that.
Alrighty. Paul, Matt?
So the one for me, it's almost adjacent to body horror, or maybe a parallel to that. Medical science has so much scary territory that you can go into. The kind of go-to for me with that, because I like to pair horror with investigative style games, hence Call of Cthulhu being my go-to wheelhouse. Something along the lines of the Andromeda Strain, where you have a bunch of scientists that are trying to understand what is this thing that has resulted in this quite horrific situation and setup for the beginning of the story. And basically from there, it then devolves more into the investigation and almost a thriller side than horror. But that opening setup of everyone's dead in this town apart from 2 people. What happened? That's nightmare fuel to that just something fell out of the sky and it killed everyone without seemingly lifting a finger or even anyone seeing a finger in the first place. And then that investigation into what happened, I think, is again ripe territory that you can exploit for a horror game.
Well, I mean, especially in a sci-fi scenario, you just change a village for a spaceship. You know, if you're being called to investigate some floating liner and all the crew are dead apart from 2 people in such a confined space, I think that's actually that's a pretty good way of doing it. So I mean, you could really take some of these horror themes and transpose them pretty easy to a sci-fi environment. I think specifically the idea of the panel is to try and figure out how we can use the horror in that sci-fi in a very sort of sci-fi sort of fashioned way. I think that's a really good way of doing it. Is better ways to transpose normal tropes, like you arrive at a village and investigate. You arrive at this derelict and investigate. You know, very good ways to do it. Paul, do you have any thoughts? What's your go-to for sci-fi horror? What do you like?
I'm glad you asked because I'd lost track of what the question was.
I'm trying to do my moderation thing.
I mean, no offense intended, but it definitely wouldn't be body horror. I don't handle body horror at all well. If I was playing John's game, I'd have to put my hand up and walk out. In terms of a go-to for, it's what you've just mentioned is the prime reason why I probably don't have a go-to. In that, if I'm going to do a sci-fi horror, it's likely to be a situation that could, as I mentioned earlier with Alien, you could put Alien now, or as you're just saying, you could take a village and make it a spaceship, or a spaceship and make it whatever. Because bizarrely, when you mentioned a liner, I thought of Triangle, and I couldn't remember why the weird sort of that's a great horror, and I'm now going to work out how to set it in space, but. The tendency is that I will almost definitely just lean into my horrors, and my investigations tend to find a little thing, a MacGuffin, and I will use almost anything in any system to run it. I mean, I don't know whether I mentioned Maelstrom at the beginning, which is from the 80s, and it's an Elizabethan role-playing game. I've used this to run sci-fi. I mean, and I ran for no reason other than I wanted to try. So there's a thing at the heart of that game, which is the Maelstrom. It's this vortex of uncontrollable energy that connects everything and everyone together, and it just for some reason hit me. As I said, a MacGuffin is normally the route into how can you create an adventure around this aspect. I mean, so the one example of a sci-fi that I've written, for example, for Cthulhu Hack was Valkyrie 9, which is set on the moon, and all of the player characters are maintenance robots. There's probably what's the name of the? I've got the second word of the movie title running. The one with the little droids set in the
Silent Running.
Silent Running. Yes, isn't that the one with the 3 droids and whatever? But yeah, that probably came vaguely to mind. But the idea that everyone is a maintenance droid, and putting you in a situation where there is effectively a catastrophic incident that is rendering this moon base uninhabitable. So as maintenance bots, you need to fix it, which means you need to investigate to find out what's causing the catastrophic incident. In this case, it's a Cthulhu game, so it's got to be something Cthulhu related. Okay, I'll give it away. Ultimately, the MacGuffin here is the Mi-Go are basically, you can't take pictures of them, right? Their existence interferes with cameras, So how do robots see exactly? The notion was that fundamentally a robot doesn't have the means to perceive Amigo. So how do you handle a catastrophic incident that's being brought about by Amigo's interaction with this space station? And so it's finding in that instance a way to deal with the horrors that's going on, and there are horrors involved there. Probably haven't really touched upon them by that setup, but it's finding a MacGuffin. And
I like that. I like that idea a lot, because then you've also got the inevitable bad thing happening as a time pressure point as well.
yes,
You know, like the core is going to explode in 2 days. The people are going to
But-
fall into a black hole. You know,
absolutely, yeah. And in the instance of that adventure, you can see the time pressure, but you as player characters can't truly perceive the nature of the time
Right.
pressure because there are elements of it that are simply invisible
yeah, I like that.
to your perceptions.
I like that a lot. So I did have a follow-on question for this, and I think we've kind of talked about this because we've talked a lot about, you know, ghosts in sci-fi and Cthulhian intervention and serial killers and whatnot. But and this might not be fully. Actually, you know what? I'm going to let Tom, who just popped up a question in chat, take this over for me, because my question was going to be about the preservation of like physics. And do we kind of hand wavy that, or do we not care? But I think at this point it's pretty obvious that we like moving into weird mysticism as well. But Tom just put in a nice question about what cool situations have you created with space sci-fi tropes like no gravity, vacuum, etc. Have you has anybody here had a cool trope that you've made for a sci-fi adventure that has made it like a again, because I think in normal adventures where you can't really simulate zero gravity on Earth, you know, or in like, but if you look in like movies such as Event Horizon, zero gravity can add a whole bunch of horror, you know, like a frozen body kind of like floating in front of the screen, or you know, someone's dismembered hand or something. Do you have any tropes like that in sci-fi that you've used or you would like to use? What kind of, and this is an open question for anybody.
I love the thought of I call it sci-fi white. So if you're watching the sci-fi movie and then the hallway illuminates white,
Mm.
and it's almost like a non-directional. It's just everything is white, right? I love that thought, and so I call it sci-fi white. And again, going back to Alien and Chariot of the Gods, there is a scene where early in the game where the player character's spaceship will do a umbilical connection to the derelict spaceship that they find, and it's a physical hard connection. So a tunnel is extended and it locks on and all this stuff.
Mm.
And so when I'm running the game, I describe how the interior of that is illuminated sci-fi white. And everyone's like, oh yeah, okay, I know what that is. All right. And so they'll traverse through 0G and just kind of float down this thing, get to the other end, and try and find a way to get into that ship. Well, the sci-fi white is opaque, right? So you don't see space, you don't see the surface of the ship that you're going to. I mean, other than the circle that's exposed from where the umbilical's touching, right? And you don't see your own ship, right? You're just in this white tunnel. And what they don't know is that there is, you know, spoilers. Game's been out for several years, but spoilers. There is a creature outside on the surface of the derelict ship. And of course, this is something new and different that's happening that hasn't been happening in decades for it. And so this umbilical's there, and the characters are inside, and as you're able to traverse inside this thing, and you can, you know, travel back and forth between the two ships now. I will eventually have an encounter where when there's just one person, I always wait until there's just one person inside the umbilical, and then they'll have this look where they can see, because it's touching the surface of the tunnel, the umbilical tunnel. There's this silhouette, this kind of fuzzy silhouette that's showing on the surface of the sci-fi white tunnel, and that gives everybody who's ever been in that hallway, and I talk about how they just start seeing these weird handprints kind of appearing on the surface of the tunnel. So if there's something on the outside of it, it gives them the heebie-jeebies so bad, just because they're like, what is out there that has hands, So that's always been a lot of fun.
Any other examples from people, like nice sci-fi tropes that things that you can only really do in a sci-fi setting? I mean, zero gravity is obviously a good example here. The sci-fi white is an excellent example. I think people have used time dilation. Like, because you talk a lot about when you're doing fast and light travel, you have time dilation, whereas time passes quicker for you than it does for the people you leave behind. And just as a thought that just occurred to me, like, what if you've been forced into fast and light travel, and then when you finally come back, you escape the problem, like something's kidnapped you and moved you to another place. You resolve that issue, and then the weird tragedy is when you arrive back home, everybody you've ever known and loved is dead because of time dilation from fast and light travel. Like, so it's like, I'm free, I've escaped, and then you come back to like the ruined civilization of your home. I think that would be pretty awful.
As
Yeah.
Star Trek's been mentioned.
No, go ahead.
As Star Trek's been mentioned before, I was just going to throw in that there's a moment I always come back to, which features everyone's favorite engineer, Chief O'Brien, where he's confronted with two copies of himself, and he just says, "I hate temporal mechanics," and puts his head in his hands. Yeah. So yeah, I try to avoid stuff like that in game, because time travel just breaks brains, scenarios, and timelines. And yeah, no, that's a whole can of worms I don't want to open particularly.
Well, I should note, time dilation is different than time travel.
Yeah,
so time travel,
much faster and slower. But,
yeah. So yeah, we discussed this in a panel yesterday about how most people like to stay away from time travel just because it's goopy and it's not great unless it's in like a one horror trope was like a Groundhog's Day kind of event. So that's a good example of time travel, but it's very limited to a very sort of like small short period of time. It's not like going back to like the 1800s or forward to like the near future. It's just like one of the exceptions of it. Yeah, I think time travel as a whole, but time dilation, I like the idea of people aging at different rates, still on the same timeline, still with that same inevitability.
I guess I could do something that was a version of time travel. I could do something where at least one of the characters in the novel or in the adventure suddenly lost a year.
Just gone.
Just gone.
I like that.
It's 2024 now, isn't it? No, it's 2027. But you were here all the time with us. Don't you remember it? Yesterday we went to the concert. It's just gone. I mean, I could do something about that. It could be an interesting concept.
Well, especially if that person turns out to be the serial killer, during that year on the starship.
Yeah, and it's gone. It's lost. He doesn't remember that at all.
Yeah, I like that. That's an awful premise. Like time is an incredibly fear-inducing thing, especially when you start feeling like you don't have enough of it.
Or you start aging very strangely. Could also be interesting.
Yeah, I like that.
Suddenly you're growing age, or you're growing old at the third, that's 3 times the normal rate. That would also be kind of horrifying.
Mm.
Even though you don't notice it until it's gone a couple of years, but everybody, otherwise I've only has aged 5 years, I've aged 15 years. What's going on?
So would you say the horror then is less about time and more about mortality?
Mortality and the unexpected again. I like the unexpected in horror. So I would say let's also see what the player tries to explain it with.
Hmm.
Perhaps they have a better idea than I had originally.
The idea of having the player fill in their own blanks was
Yeah,
one thing we also.
yeah. See what's your greatest fear that you haven't told us about?
That's what it is. Be terrified. Yeah, that's a. Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of pass this into another question then. What's the best visceral reaction you've had from a player to something that you've run or you've designed? Like, have you ever had someone come to you and say, "That was terrifying. I never want to deal with this ever again," but it was a great time? Like, what can like? I'm assuming John is about to say something body horror related.
I haven't had that badge of honor yet.
Really?
Yeah. Not there where anyone has gone, that was too terrifying, don't want to do it again, and had a good time. There's, it's just, people have had a good time, but I haven't terrified. I don't think I've actually truly terrified anyone yet.
We had a session back in the 1990s where we played Cult Original Edition on conventions around in Sweden. And one of our first adventures, this is a long time ago, it's a big spoiler, the player characters has to commit suicide a bit in to continue the story.
Wow.
And of course, it's cult, so death is on the beginning. They could play on. And the player characters, they play through the session, and to make things worse, the player characters are children. They're between 14 and 12 years old.
You're hearing a few content warnings there, I think, with just that one game.
These days there will be quite a lot of content warnings, but this was the glorious 90s and no such thing. And afterwards, several of the players come up to me and Gunilla and told us that was the most horrifying experience I ever had. I hope I never have anything like it again. But it was great. I loved it. So they liked it even though they were horrified. And perhaps that's part of the secret of horror. Good horror has to make you happy and horrified.
Well, I mean, that's why you enjoy horror movies, right? There's the feeling of terror. I think there's. Anybody else have any kind of like good stories for like ways they've terrified players or just horrified them?
It's outside of a sci-fi context, but one of the badges of honor that I remember getting was just having a particular player in a game about a year ago, I think it was, where I was just giving a description of a particular scene that they found. It's not quite a crime scene, but it's a body, but things that have happened to it since then. And this poor player just looking at me, kind of slightly sort of slack-jawed, wide open eyes,
No.
going, "How do you sleep at night?" and there's me going, "Well, actually, the problem I have is keeping awake because I'm constantly tired."
Paul, any fun stories?
Fun stories.
Well, I say fun in this
well, yeah.
context. We're probably awful people for thinking this is fun. Well, I am, but
I hope I'm not an awful person. I mean, the example I gave before of the Valkyrie 9 actually, where, or any adventure like that, where I enjoy as a GM the moment of recognition from the players. I think I get it now moments, those that dawning as their eyes suddenly light up or go wide as they show their understanding for what it is. And again, we're probably sliding away from sci-fi in general, but in horror, I think, yes, that recognition of, oh my, heck, really, what is that? Yeah, and sometimes you'll see it from one player, and actually that's even more interesting, because if you see it in one player and they are they are reveling in that moment of recognition. They might not even pass it on to the other players because they for a moment they want to hold that revelation themselves. That I love. And then they might explain it, but preferably they don't, because if anything, giving the other players the opportunity to have that same moment, maybe they need a few more clues, a few more, a bit more of the scene to go before they get it. That's as a GM, rather than necessarily. I don't think I've ever terrified anyone, because I'd be the first person to go. But
Yeah.
I'm the person who walks out of horror movies because they just push things slightly too far. But I think if you run a horror game and you get those moments of revelation and that eye widening moment, that's for me is extra special. It means you've done something just right, just special.
So a specific question for you then, like, because you obviously have a very strong reaction to like when horror pushes it too far, and yet you work designing RPGs that have that horror. How do you reconcile those two things? What's your secret there? Like, how do you? Is it just you find yourself pushed down a particular alley, or how do you reconcile that?
It's weird. I mean, I can write about things and I can present them. I guess sometimes though, I just can't necessarily experience them, and I don't. To a certain degree, some of the examples in this session, for example, I think it often comes down to how your ideas are interpreted, how they are presented, how you in the adventure put an idea forward to allow the GM to expand upon it and present it in a way that takes it to the next level. Because you as a writer can only go so far to begin with in putting the idea forward, because any given group is going to have a different reaction to that adventure because you don't know who's playing it. So it feels like I wouldn't, if John was in one of my games, I wouldn't be able to gross him out because my threshold is clearly far lower. But perhaps I can put forward an adventure that someone could run, which would gross him out enough to be able to maybe. So I guess that the balance there is that if you can present the structure, the concept, the plot, and put forward a generalization of the ideas, you don't necessarily need to be able to literally stomach them yourself to be able to do it.
So are you acting then as a kind of facilitator then, I suppose?
I think so. Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's awesome. Cool. No, that's very telling. And I think I know a couple of you mentioned saying that this has moved away from sci-fi, but like I think as we've previously discussed, we can take a lot of concepts from normal horror and move them into a sci-fi genre. So I think these are all very good examples, and they're all very good ways of being able to move that into a sci-fi genre. So perhaps then Tom says Paul and I probably have the same threshold.
Good.
On a personal level, I don't know what it is. I find that when I'm running horror, my threshold is much higher than when I am experiencing horror. Like I can play horror like video game. Well, I can't play video horror games because they freak me out. But I can watch someone else play a video horror game because it's not. I think it's an immersion thing for me. Like if it feels like the danger is present for me, then that's when it becomes an issue. But I like seeing other people get terrified, which is probably what makes me a bad person. I don't know. Let's we're running up. Got about 15 minutes left on our thing. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you guys through a final quick fire session. And I'm going to direct this to each of you one at a time. and then give you guys an opportunity to just let people know where they can find your work, how to get hold of you. But this is before we get into that, I just want to say it's been an absolute honor to talk to you all. Fantastic opportunity to talk about one of my favorite things, which is sci-fi, and then how that can be written into horror. So thank you very much. It's been a great personal pleasure for me to talk to you all. So let's go through this question. Best question suggested earlier. Actually, I'm going to hit you with two. I'm going to have you answer two questions. The first question is, what is the most terrifying thing you can think of in a sci-fi setting? And then the second one is the best sci-fi game you've ever played. So I'm going to pick at random. No, I'm not. I'm just going to say John. Go, John. You're up first.
Let's see. The most terrifying thing in a game, I think, would be to be separated and cut off, from the other players, and it was something that you were just too late for. Like a gulf has opened up, for some reason. Maybe a ship is pulling away or something is breaking, and or people are racing across a rickety bridge or something, and it collapses after that last guy got across, but I couldn't get across. So be separated from the others, and having that isolation can be pretty intense and terrifying in the moment, especially if there's the creature or whatever's coming right after you. But honestly, I think the best horror sci-fi game is the Alien role-playing game. I love that game so much.
All right. Well, Michael gave the thumbs up there. So, Michael, what's your take?
I've got a bit different take, actually. I always find that other people, other humans, are the most terrifying thing in a role-playing game. So, if I take an example, if you go back to Aliens, which are Alien is an excellent game, but perhaps the most terrifying character in Chariot of Gods is not the biomorph, but the executive person working for the company. He's probably the most terrifying person on board. So other people, us humans, are the most terrifying creatures out in the galaxy. So that's even the ground concept of cult in the original version, that we are all the outer evil gods, and we were punished and placed here in this prison because we were so fucking dangerous that we actually threatened the multiverse. So for me, it would be humans. The most terrifying thing in space or in horror or wherever the place might be are other people.
Mm-hmm.
And for the role-playing game, which I tried to put into this little discussions earlier on, Tribe 8.
Which one?
Which one? It's called Tribe 8. It's a game actually made by a long time ago. It was released in 1998, I think. It was released a long time ago by DreamPod 9. And it's a post-apocalyptic horror game. And I'm trying to find back to this. There we are. What's wrong here? Dear God.
I'm looking it up.
There we are. There we are. It's a post-apocalyptic game, horror game. It's quite a lot of sci-fi in it as well. It's set in Canada after the Great Disaster, where something strange, otherworldly, unhuman, monstrous has come through from the River of Dreams, they call it, which is probably just another dimension. And they started hunting the humans, putting them in camp and eating them and torturing them. And finally, we got released by a group of religious figures who probably are the same creatures as the one that put us in the prisons or in the camps, the Sebrees. And these 9 characters are called the Fatimas. And they are bringing salvation and religion into humankind. And it is an excellent game. It is strong in horror and body horror and the unexpected. It has a very, very strange new take on having a post-apocalyptic game. So if you haven't played it, if you can find it anywhere, for God's sake, buy it, because it's an excellent game and there's a lot of material to buy for it. That would be my recommendation.
I'm looking at the page for it now, and the title is "The Past is Dead, Your Future Begins Now," which is a hell of an intro line for a game. I like that. Simple to the point. I like it.
And the player characters have absolutely no idea what happened or what's going on to start with.
And so, side note, I just realized that I miscalculated time because apparently I haven't had enough caffeine today. We do have another sort of 20 minutes, I think, before end of stream. But so if you wanna elaborate a little bit on these things, like, feel free to fill in some time. Otherwise, I screwed up, and I want to make it seem by design. So I'm going to move on to Paul. Paul, give us since you're laughing at my failures. Oh,
Me? No, in no way, shape, or form. So I mean, so the most terrifying thing in a sci-fi. So my mind's actually went to movies and stuff like that. And actually, for me, it is and it's not strictly a horror. But it's referencing into the whole business of the incomprehensible and the unknown. Bizarrely enough, the truly unsettling for me are the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes of 2001: A Space Odyssey. That whole because ultimately that is, I know what we are seeing is comprehensible, but it is an attempt to present an incomprehensible alien mind dealing with something that it can't truly grasp, and for some reason there is just something really unsettling about it. It's helped by that 5 minutes of psychedelia and weird the soundtrack, which leads into then that final moment of mundane old person growing old, and actually it references into what I think John said about isolation, that concept of being, you are trapped in he's trapped in a single space, and he can see him, but that's weirdly unsettling for me, and if there was a way to put player groups through that, I'd be more than happy to watch their skin crawl as they were sort of grasping that. From the point of view of best sci-fi horror game, I'm going to go weird on this as well, purely because I've worked on it. Paranoia. If you can just wrestle anybody's brain away from their concept of what they think paranoia is, i.e., every time you stand in a room with somebody, you need to shoot them. The whole concept of this enclosed society, which is almost like lab rats in a cage, where the lab rats can't die, and they are being constantly manipulated and by this upper hierarchy. They are the full person for any and every activity, and in the version I worked on, which was the one in the noughties, 2004 or whatever, the Paranoia XP, before Microsoft got all haughty-toity about it, and had the XP stripped away. That put forward the idea of the straight setting rather than the sort of classic or zap approach. And the straight setting is dark and grim, but it's set in a future where, God damn it, never mind time dilation, the year 214 happens every single time, and there's no explanation of it, because the computer fundamentally believes in a state of perfection, and perfection must be achievable. So let's go at it again. Let's have 214 happen all over again. And it's clearly, as a concept, it's got legs for horror, for these plans, these ploys, and actually links into a book and movie there's a movie coming out called Mickey 17, which is based on a book called Mickey 7, which when I started reading it, just said paranoia to me. It's a sci-fi where effectively you sign up to be killed. The first part of it is fundamentally you are killed, but your entire genome or whatever is mapped so that you can be cloned, and you effectively allow yourself to be the sort of the bulwark, the grunt at the front of an exploratory force, because you effectively can be cloned whenever you die. But yeah, the things don't go exactly as planned. I won't ruin the movie, but the book was very enjoyable. But the moment I started reading it, it was this is essentially paranoia played in a slightly different way. But yeah, I think that there are, if you're able to pick it up, there's a supplement called WMD, Weapons of Mass Destruction, which deals with a lot of the straighter things, and adventures like Hunger, which are very much of that sort of grim, very grim ilk, which shows you paranoia can be played in a very different way.
I'm looking forward to the Mickey 17. It's going to star Petersén, Robert Petersén. I didn't know that was a book, so it's Mickey 7 is the book.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna look for that. And funny enough, weirdly enough, paranoia is one that I haven't been a player at that table yet. I need to get into a paranoia game, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to the movie. It's not out yet, though, right? Okay.
Yeah. No,
right.
Soon. I suspect the trailers and so forth.
I can't wait. Yes, I do like, because the trailer. If you haven't seen the trailer, see the trailer for Mickey 17. There's even a scene where other people are just like loading bodies into an incinerator, and then Robert's in the body bag, and he moves, and one of the women go, "Oh my God, he's still alive!" and he just goes, "It's fine," and they just dump him into the incinerator. He's just like, "Oh my God."
I'll have to watch that then. That looks pretty good.
It's a second book there's a second book in the series now as well. I think it's going to be 3 books in the series.
All right, I'm gonna have to look that up.
Mickey 17. All right, I'm checking that out as well right now. So Matt, that leaves you with our final entry here to the Sci-Fi Hall of Fame.
Oh, the previous 2 answers have brought back some good memories. I remember playing Tribe 8 about 20 odd years ago, and having our GM try to describe the concept of the black top, and having all of the players around the table going, "What the hell is this thing?" And the poor GM eventually just giving up and saying, "Look, it's a road, it's a highway, it's the asphalt." And then everyone going, "Oh yeah, of course." But lots of fleshy horror goodness there. And Paul, I was about to suggest, if you haven't played Paranoia, definitely pick up WMD, because Hunger is one of the best tabletop experiences I've ever had. One of the best amounts of fun you can have, sat there doing maths throughout a whole session, going, "Hang on a minute, so this volume of this food vat, what the hell? The maths doesn't add up here." Such a good scenario. Rather than falling back on saying Alien, because I haven't played that many sci-fi games, while it would be a high choice, I'd actually go slightly left field. And while it isn't a horror game, it is again a game that has a lot of potential for horror. I'd say Blade Runner. So also the 3D game, because the game's bloody amazing. And if you get a chance to play Electric Dreams, the Adventure in the Starter set, it's phenomenal. You have a very kind of dark moral dilemma at the heart of it to try and solve, and that territory is ripe that you could easily exploit towards horror. I'm hoping the upcoming Replicant Rebellion source book adds more layers that you can put in a similar vein. But yeah, so definitely two thumbs up for me for Blade Runner. As for most terrifying thing that you could put in a sci-fi context, I'll probably go a bit more philosophical and just say astrophysics, because when you look at the real universe around you, while it is awe-inspiring if you stand out there in the night sky looking up at all these stars, and seeing galaxies far, far away, us almost in a Cthulhian or Lovecraftian angle, our size compared to the vastness of space, the shortness of our lives compared to the cosmic time spans, that ultimately our Earth is going to be swallowed into the sun, that there's going to be no record of our achievements left to survive in millions of years, when all the stars go out and leave the universe, this cold, dark, lifeless place where we will be long forgotten and there's no one left to remember anyway. That kind of realization, that's spine-tinglingly terrifying for me. That's like horror incarnate. And that's just the universe in which we live. So yeah, I will leave you on that lovely uplifting note as what I would say is the most terrifying thing in sci-fi.
It always makes me think of the total perspective vortex from Hitchhikers, which is the same concept that Zaphod Beeblebrox is put into the total perspective vortex to attempt to show him how insignificant he is, but he manages to completely twist it around, and it merely just buffs up the size of his ego. But yeah, I mean that concept of that we are totally and utterly insignificant. It is. I'm sure you're going to bore people to death, though, if you use that as the introduction to the average Cthulhu scenario. But it kind of needs to be hammered home that that's kind of the point that you are going for in the horror. That it's that whole discussion of your utter insignificance, like a crumb of fairy cake on a compared to the size of the universe. Which is the total perspective vortex again. Yeah, it's something that should inspire more horror. I guess if you can wrangle it into a couple of sentences that will hit it home with the players.
Life. Don't talk to me about life.
The concept of inevitability. I hate it. As a side note, for you space physics fans out there is an object out there called a magnetar, which is a neutron star with an incredibly powerful magnetic field. And if it ever passed within 1 million miles of this planet, everything that you know and love would just disappear. Its magnetic field is so strong that it would literally tear our magnetic field from our system, radiate everything in radiation, and would wipe every device, destroy. You get close enough to a magnetar, it can literally strip the iron out of your atoms. It molds your DNA into a needle shape, like you become a squishy mess. And that's just within millions of miles of passing by one. They're horrific. And there's things like that out in space which are absolutely terrifying. And I love that concept. I love the concept of physics. Just physics alone is one of the biggest antagonists that you can have in a sci-fi game. I love it.
I mean, oddly enough, and this is really about horror, but I found it useful to. I don't know. Well, I was going to say genuine, true, real science, but obviously science is all about constantly calculating and recalculating things and presenting theories. But there was a notion put forward in a book called Before the Big Bang, a multiversal theory that there are many universes, and each of the universes has different amounts of energy. And actually, the concept was that the reason why we haven't bumped into anybody as such is that actually we exist in a low energy universe. There isn't enough going on as a result of which, but there are other universes which are high energy. And I had this concept that then tied into the Cthulhu mythos, where there are lots of things that seem to be like Cthulhu sleeping. So we are in a low energy universe. There isn't enough going on. There isn't enough to eat to actually keep these entities active all the time. And that's the reason why there's the smallest infinitesimal fighting chance for the people of this universe, in that there isn't enough to keep them active. In the high energy universes, these creatures just rip through it like a hot knife through butter. But for some reason, we've managed to flip a coin to end up in a universe which is relatively low energy. And that's the reason why so many things are sleeping or in this weird state where they prefer to sit around being entertained by music. But it was an opportunity to tie some real science into the mythos and sort of reconcile it.
I like the concept that we're in a cosmic retirement home. I think that's pretty good. I like that a lot. Well, I think we are drawing up on time. Thankfully, we managed to fill the time in quite nicely. So I'm going to go down the list again. Have you give yourselves the opportunity to say cheerio and let people know where to find you. Michael, let's start with you.
Oh dear. I am, though, seated in Sweden, this strange country in the far north, where there are polar bears and naked people running around on the streets.
Sign me up.
Basically, everything I have done together with Gunilla, because I've mostly worked with her for now over 40 years, we are published in Swedish. One of our novels, we have 3 novels published by the Free League. One of them was published in English some 6 or 7 years ago. Death is Only the Beginning. That might be found. Otherwise, you have to learn Swedish. If you come here to learn Swedish, please beware of the polar bears. Otherwise, you're very much welcome to learn Swedish and read these hopefully quite readable and enjoyable adventures and games that we have created during the years. I can be found through Helmgast and through Free League. We have mainly worked for those. I can also be found through the Swedish game company Eloso, which publishes Call of Cthulhu Sweden. I am found on Facebook under my own name. I have Paddington as my signature. You can probably not find that many more. Michael Petersén, which actually have a Paddington for a signature on Facebook, so that will be me. I am in the work of setting up my Blue Sky account. It's not there yet, but we probably call something like Michael.Petersen, not Blue Sky. So you can find me there in a week or so. And thank you for listening to my ramblings, and thank you very much for a most interesting panel with interesting panelists and an interesting and quite intelligent and smart and good-looking moderator.
Oh my goodness, please. You do me an honor, sir. John, give us your outros while I sit here and blush into infinity.
My name is John Hook. I am on the Modern Mythos podcast with YouTuber Seth Skorkowski, and you can find Modern Mythos on pretty much any podcatcher. Modern Mythos and myself separately are both available on Facebook and Discord. That's pretty much the only social things that I do, and not very much at that. Anyways, but there you go. Yeah, and I'm currently working on. I wrote a scenario that will be published with Golden Goblin Press. They recently did a Kickstarter for their third Cthulhu Companion, Island of Ignorance, to reprint that with 7th edition rules. And in the process of that Kickstarter, which I have a scenario in that one, the third Cthulhu Companion, the Kickstarter also funded the 4th Cthulhu Companion, Black Seas of Infinity, and I have a scenario that will be included in that collection. And I'm also working with a group right now, the Lurking Fears group, to write a scenario that will be included in their Cthulhu Masters tournament at Origins. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Paul, where can we find you?
So you can find Paul Baldowski on Blue Sky. I've been there a while. I'm in the first million, but yeah, that is currently the best broadly social media place to find me. Otherwise, you can find links to various things at justcrunch.com, and there's also allrolledup.co.uk where physical books are available, and both, well, Cthulhu Hack is available referencing that, not in Swedish. Cthulhu Hack's available in French from 12 Monkeys and Italian by MS Edition, and Desanction, which is my Elizabethan horror game, is available from Shadowlands in Spanish. So it's beyond just these shores of the UK. And yeah, at the moment, that's probably the best place. JustCrunch.com is the best place to find me, and Blue Sky, where, yes, as I said, I'm quite enjoying myself. It's quite a nice place to be.
Nice. It's nice. Matt, where can we find you, sir?
I don't do social media too much, but the little bits that I do get involved with, besides blasphemoustomes.com for our podcast, where you can reach us through there, would be on either the Good Friends of Jackson Elias Discord or the Into the Darkness Discord, the group that we do lots of Cthulhu and other horror gaming actual plays up on YouTube.
Awesome. And lastly, I'm again Bear Winters. You can find me on Blue Sky at Bear Winters. I'm also on X, but I'm not really active on there anymore. I'm probably gonna shut down that account. Probably. I created. You can find my games at projectbiomodus.com or on DriveThruRPG. That's where I publish Project Biomodus. Currently working on Shores of Sheol, which hopefully should be up soon. But yeah, would love to see you. I'm also on Instagram as bear.thr if you want to see my doodlings, because I moonlight as an illustrator too. So you can find me there. Once again, I am greatly honored to have been able to moderate the panel here for these wonderful people. Been a great time. Thank you for having me. Thank you for indulging my questions and indulging the questions of Tom in chat. But yeah, thanks again, everybody. Hope you have a great con. And look forward for more panels coming, I believe. I think there's a few more, right? So yeah. One more with a penultimate panel.
Wow.
My goodness, what an honor. I dig that. All right. Have a good one. We're out. Bye-bye.
Bye.